Chef Lock Scones, Entree, Act 1, A Morning of Mystery. It was a crisp morning in the bustling streets of Baker's Row, the heart of London's culinary scene. Chef Lock Scones stood by the window of his cozy kitchen detective office, the scent of simmering stock mingling with the sharp tang of freshly baked bread. His keen eyes surveyed the chaotic streets below, while his hands idly diced a shallot with precision that would make a surgeon envious. Beside him, Dr. Dimsum perused a recipe book, muttering notes about the perfect dumpling fold. Chef Lock, Dimsum began, adjusting his spectacles. You've hardly slept. Another culinary mystery keeping you awake? Chef Lock turned, his eyes alight with purpose. Indeed, Dimsum. Detective Lestrudel sent word of a peculiar dish he stumbled upon last night at the Grand Gastronomy Gala. A dish so exquisite yet impossible to decipher. He requires our assistance. Lestrudel, that poor culinary bumbler, Dimsung sighed, always finding brilliance by accident but never understanding the recipe. What's the case this time? As if summoned, the door burst open and Detective Lestrudel strode in, his chef's coat slightly singed. Scones. The gala. It was astonishing. A dish appeared. The celestial truffle souffle, a masterpiece, but no one knows its origin. Not a hint of the creator's identity or ingredients. Chef Luck's brow furrowed. And you suspect foul play? Lestrudel nodded. Michelinardi. The name hung in the air like the aroma of burnt sugar. Michelinardi, Chef Luck's nemesis, detested his culinary genius and the time he dedicated to unraveling gastronomic enigmas. Their rivalry was as bitter as an oversteeped tea. Michelinardi would never craft such brilliance, Chef Luck mused. But sabotage? That is his domain. Dimson leaned forward. How shall we begin? To the gala, Chef Luck declared. But first, a palate preparation. He plucked an herb from a nearby pot, crushed it between his fingers, and sniffed. Basil. The scent shall sharpen our senses. Act 2. The Grand Gastronomy Gala. At the Grand Gastronomy Gala, the remnants of the celestial truffle souffle lay under glass, guarded like the crown jewels. Chef Luck bent over it, inhaling deeply. His nostrils flared, and a grin spread across his face. Hints of white truffle, saffron, and anise, but peculiar. There's a touch of apricot. He closed his eyes, picturing the ingredients in harmony. Dr. Dinsong took notes while Lestrudel hovered nervously. Do you think Michelinardi? Chef Luck waved him off. This is too elegant for his British hand, but he may have stolen it. We must consult Iceland batter. Act 3. Consulting the critic. Iceland batter. The enigmatic food critic greeted them at her private dining loft. A woman of sharp wit and sharper palate. She shared a peculiar bond with Chef Lock, their mutual admiration tempered by playful rivalry. Chef Lock, Batter purred, swirling a glass of port. To what do I owe the pleasure? The celestial truffle souffle, Chef Lock stated. We suspect Michelinardi. Batter's eyes sparkled. Ah, the dish of the decade. I tasted it. Sublime. Yet there was an imperfection. The faintest whisper of over-whisked egg whites. Chef Luck nodded, his mind racing. Over-whisked. Deliberate sabotage. Michelinardi wanted this mystery to unravel. Act 4. A scent of sabotage. The investigation led them to an abandoned patisserie in Soho. Inside, the scent of sabotage lingered. Burnt sugar, scorched cream, and a faint hint of truffle. Michelinardi's calling card. He was here, Chef Lock whispered. But why? A rustling behind them made them whirl around. Brandraff Scones, Cheflock's younger brother, stepped out from the shadows, his hands dusted with flour. Brandraff, Dinsung exclaimed. What are you doing here? Brandraff smirked. Cleaning up your mess, brother. Michelin left a trail. Follow it to the old Gorman Theater. Act 5. The Gorman Theater. At the theater, they found Michelin himself, standing over a bubbling cauldron of bisque. Ah, Cheflock, Michelin sneered. Always meddling. This time you'll find no recipe to save you. Cheflock stepped forward, unperturbed. You underestimate the power of a true chef. In a battle of culinary wits, Cheflock deduced the bisque every ingredient while Michelin grew increasingly flustered. Finally, the villain fled, leaving behind a single clue, a recipe scrawled in code. Act 6. Unmasking the Creator. Back at Baker's Row, Cheflock deciphered the recipe with Dim Sum's help. The celestial truffle souffle's true creator was revealed, a reclusive chef who had vanished years ago, leaving Michelin to claim credit. As they celebrated with the perfect souffle of their own, icing batter raised a glass. To Cheflock Scones, the only man who can unravel a dish as deftly as a mystery. Cheflock smiled. Into good food, batter, the ultimate truth that binds us all. Cheflock Scones in Delicious in Dungeon. Act 1. Into the Dungeon Market. The thick fog of the dungeon market hung in the air, a strange mingling of roasted Wivingtel and caramelized coboled onions. Cheflock Scones adjusted his trademark toque as he surveyed the bustling scene. By his side, Dr. Dimsung carried a satchel with culinary implements. One never knew when inspiration might strike. Cheflock, I must say, Dimsung began, his tone part awe, part trepidation. Venturing into the dungeon's depth for a recipe seems a tad excessive, even for you. Excessive? Perhaps, Cheflock replied, his eyes scanning the stalls with the precision of a falcon. But there lies a mystery most profound, a rumors of a dish so transcendent it defies conventional description. The Phoenix Souffle, a creation said to use ingredients sourced only from within these labyrinth halls. Dimsung frowned. And what of Mitchell and Nardi? Surely he wouldn't let such a prize remain undiscovered. Cheflock's expression hardened. Exactly why we must act swiftly. I received word from Iceland Batter that Mitchell and Nardi was last seen gathering rare ingredients. If he claims the Phoenix Souffle for his own, the culinary world, no. The very essence of gastronomy could be at stake. Act 2. The Goblin's Clue. Their first stop was a curious stall run by a goblin chef, a connoisseur of dungeon delicacies. The goblin offered a pungent jar of Kamara liver pate, its aroma thick with promise. How may I assist, esteemed culinary sleuth? The goblin rasped. Information, Cheflock said, leaning in. We seek the recipe for the Phoenix Souffle, and I suspect you've heard whisper of its preparation. The goblin's eyes glinted. Ah, the legendary dish. I've only heard fragments. Phoenix feather for the evening, ember yolks harvested from fire drakes, and the tears of a water nymph to bind it all. But be warned, the path to such ingredients is fraught with peril. Cheflock nodded, unfazed. Where might one begin? The goblin pointed towards the depths. Seek the ember cauldron deep within the magma spires. But tread lightly, for Mitchell himself passed through here not long ago. Act 3. The Ember Cauldron. In the sweltering heat of the magma spires, Cheflock and Dimsung's preservation was rewarded. They came upon the ember cauldron, a bubbling pool of molten fire guarded by a towering salamander. Beside it stood a familiar figure, Brindraft Scones. Brindraft, Dimsum exclaimed. What are you doing here? Brindraft smirked, tossing a glowing ember yolk into the air and catching it with ease. Covering your back as usual. Mitchell and Nardi left traps throughout the spires. If you're not careful, you'll end up as salamander chow. Cheflock's eyes narrowed. Do you have the ingredients? Most of them, Brindraft replied, tossing a small satchel to his brother. But the phoenix feather? That's another story. Mitchell and Artie's stolen it, and he's headed for the Crystal Kitchen. Act 4. The Crystal Kitchen. The Crystal Kitchen was a breathtaking cavern of shimmering quartz and ice. In its center, Mitchell and Artie loomed over a blazing phoenix, its radiant feathers igniting the room. Scones, Mitchell and Artie sneered. I knew you'd come, but the phoenix souffle shall be mine. Its secret, however, dies with me. Cheflock stepped forward, calm as ever. You forget, Mitchell and Artie. Recipes are stories, and stories long to be told. You can't hoard culinary brilliance. In a flash, the phoenix burst into flames, its essence captured in a single shimmering feather. Mitchell and Artie lunged for it, but Brindraft intercepted, his reflexes honed from years of daring escapades. Dimsung, Cheflock called. A rolling boil, if you please. Dimsung, ever the loyal sous chef, produced a portable burner, and the three set to work. Cheflock dictated measurements with precision. Brindraft whisked the ember yolks, and Dimsung folded the phoenix feather, its ethereal glow suffusing the batter. Mitchell and Artie, defeated and furious, vanished into the shadows. Act 5. The Soufflé Triumph. Later, in the safety of Baker's Row, the trio unveiled their creation to iceling batter. The phoenix souffle rose like a dream, its texture impossibly light yet rich with flavor. Perfection, Iceland whispered, her voice reverent. You've done it again, Cheflock. Cheflock smiled, raising a glass of sparkling elderflower cordial. To the art of cuisine, my friends, the true treasure of any dungeon. Cheflock Scones is supernatural in The Brownie Case. Act 1. The Call to London. The Impala roared down the M25, its classic rock playlist rattling the quiet English countryside. Bream Worcester adjusted the rearview mirror with a practiced flick, his leather jacket creaking as they leaned back into the seat. Beside him, Sam Worcester scrolled through an ancient-looking tome, his brow furrowed in concentration. So let me get this straight, Bream began, his eyes scanning the road. Some hotshot chef Gouda Lamsey type calls us all the way to London because his souffle keeps falling. Sam smirked but didn't look up. Not quite. Chef Jelly Oliverb, Michelin star, claims his kitchen is cursed. Ingredients spoiling, recipes going haywire, and his reputation, well, it's in the blender. A cursed kitchen, Bream chuckled. What's next? Haunted silverware? Sam's expression sobered. It's serious, Bream. He's had to cancel reservations, refund bookings. Whatever's going on isn't just bad luck. If we don't help, he'll lose everything. Fine, Bream sighed, tapping the steering wheel. But if it turns out to be some kid pulling pranks, I'm ordering the biggest steak this guy can cook and calling it even. Act 2. The Haunted Kitchen. The olive herb estate loomed like a shadow against the gray London sky. Inside, the kitchen was a battlefield of culinary chaos. Spilled flour, shattered eggshells, and a faint, sour odor of curdled cream. Mr. Oliver, Sam greeted the harried chef, whose pristine white jacket was smeared with evidence of his failed attempts. We're here to help. Can you tell us exactly what's been happening? Jelly wrung his hands. It's as if the kitchen itself has turned against me. Sugar swapped with salt, my yeast refuses to rise, and my finest cheese spoiled overnight. Bream wandered over to a counter, inspecting a suspiciously blackened loaf of bread. And this started when? About a fortnight ago, Jelly said, his voice trembling. Ever since I moved in. The previous owner, he always spoke of leaving offerings in the kitchen, but I thought it was just an old wives' tale. Sam's head snapped up. Offerings? Jelly nodded. A dish of milk and bread. Said it kept the spirits happy. I didn't bother. I'm a man of science, not superstition. Sam exchanged a look with Bream. Sounds like we're dealing with a brownie. A brownie? Bream raised an eyebrow. Aren't those the little guys who clean your house if you leave them snacks? Sam nodded. Exactly. But neglect them, or worse, insult them, they can turn your life into a living hell. Swapping ingredients, spoiling food, classic brownie mischief. Bream gestured to the wrecked kitchen. So what? We just bake it a loaf and call it good? Sam frowned. It's not that simple. Brownies are picky. The dish has to be just right. If it's not, you only make things worse. Great, Bream muttered. Where do we even start? Sam pulled out his phone, scrolling rapidly. There's a culinary detective nearby. Cheflock scones. If anyone can figure out what a brownie wants, it's him. Act 3. Enter Cheflock scones. The small but impeccably tidy office of Cheflock Scones was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left. The scent of freshly baked bread and herbs filled the air as Cheflock, tall, wiry, and dressed in a crisp chef's coat, studied them with piercing eyes. Mr. Worcester, Mr. Worcester, he said, nodding to each in turn. To what do I owe the pleasure? Bream gestured vaguely. We've got a pissed off brownie trashing a chef's kitchen, and we need to know what to feed it to make it stop. Cheflock's lips curled into a faint smile. A brownie? Fascinating. And the kitchen? Did you notice any particular patterns? Specific substitutions or spoilage? Sam chimed in. Salt swapped for sugar, yeast refusing to rise, cream curdling. Cheflock's eyes narrowed as he leaned back, his fingers steepled. Classic signs of mischief indeed. Brownies often favored dishes rooted in tradition and simplicity. Milk and bread were likely the foundation, but the execution matters. Was the bread enriched? Was the milk spiced or sweetened? Bream shrugged. You're the expert, that's why we're here. Cheflock stood, his movements brisk and purposeful. Then let us waste no time. Dr. Dimsung, prepare the kitchen. We're crafting an offering that no brownie can resist. Act 4. The Perfect Offering. Back at the olive herb estate, Cheflock took command of the kitchen. His sharp eyes missed nothing as he inspected the ingredients, discarding those he deemed subpar. Brownies are creatures of habit and sentiment, he explained as he worked. Their offerings must not only nourish, but evoke comfort. We shall prepare an enriched milk loaf, lightly spiced and served with clotted cream. Dimsung measured flour with care while Bream and Sam watched, bemused. He always like this, Bream muttered. Every time, Dimsung replied with a grin. As the loaf baked, filling the kitchen with its warm, spiced aroma, Chef Luck prepared a simple bowl of cream, sweetened with just a hint of honey. When the loaf emerged, golden and perfect, he plated it alongside the cream and set it in the center of the kitchen. The room fell silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint shimmer, a small, wiry figure appeared. Its eyes gleamed with mischief. Ah, Chef Lock said softly. Welcome, friend. We hope this meets your expectations. The brownie sniffed the air, its expression shifting from suspicion to delight. It approached the offering, taking a delicate bite. A hum of satisfaction filled the room as the creature vanished, leaving only the faintest trace of laughter. Well, Bream said, clapping his hands, guess that's a wrap. Chef Lock turned, a twinkle in his eye. Another case solved. Shall we toast with tea? Chef Lock scones in Sauce Over the Wall. Act 1. A Feast in the White House. The grand dining room of the White House was alive with the clatter of silverware and the rustle of fine linens. At the head of the table sat President Rump, a man with an appetite as insatiable as his ego. Before him lay a veritable banquet, glistening roast, towering desserts, and meticulously plated hors d'oeuvres. This right here, Rump began, pointing his fork at a platter of stuffed quail. This is the best dish anyone has ever made. Believe me, I know food. I know the best foods in the world. I know the best chefs. They all love me. Tremendous job by the kitchen staff. He speared a quail leg, waving it as he spoke. The flavor, unbelievable. It's like, what do you call it? Gastronomy? I'm a big fan of gastronomy. A murmur of polite agreement rippled through the room. Encouraged, Rump moved on to a bowl of bisque. This soup, it's creamy, it's rich, very French, I think. The French love me, by the way. They really do. But then it happened. As a vibrant, fragrant dish was placed before him, and Ade's eyes widened and alarmed. Mr. President, she stammered, reaching for the plate. This wasn't supposed to be on the lineup. Rump raised an eyebrow. Why not? It looks tremendous. He grabbed a fork and took a generous bite of the dish, chewing with exaggerated satisfaction. This is incredible. The flavors are tremendous, folks. Where is it from? Who made this? The aide hesitated, wringing her hands. I thought it might be foreign, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Rump's expression changed instantly mid-chew. He spat the food out dramatically onto his plate. Foreign. I knew it. I knew it tasted foreign. This is horrible. Who brought this into my White House? The aide hesitated, her voice shaking. I think it might have been one of the kitchen staff, sir, but I'm not sure. Rump's demeanor shifted abruptly. His features darkened with outrage. Not sure? You're fired. He jabbed a finger toward another aide. You're her replacement. Start an investigation. Find out who did this. And get me the best culinary detectives. Right now. Act 2. The Sugar Crash. Back in London, Chef Lockscone sat slumped in his chair, his normally sharp eyes dulled by boredom. The cozy sitting room was littered with empty teacups and crumpled wrappers from assorted pastries. Dr. Dimsung, seated nearby, watched him with growing concern. Chef Lock, this isn't healthy, Dimsung said. You've consumed enough sugar to put a diabetic dragon into a coma. Chef Lock sighed dramatically.
What else am I to do, Dim Sung? The city, no, the world offers no mysteries worthy of my intellect. Dim Sung was about to respond when the door burst open. In strode Mrs. Puddingson, accompanied by one of President Rump's assistants, while two Secret Service agents waited just outside the door. Cheflock scones, Mrs. Puddingson exclaimed. Why on earth haven't you answered your phone? This assistant has been waiting. The assistant stepped forward, looking slightly frazzled. Dr. Dim Sung, Mr. Scones, the President of the United States requires your expertise. It's a matter of national security. Dim Sung raised an eyebrow. National security? Involving food? Mrs. Puddington nodded emphatically. President Rump's kitchen has been infiltrated by foreign cuisine, and he suspects foul play. Dim Sum began to reply, but Cheflock suddenly sprang to his feet, his energy renewed. We'll take the case. Act 3. Rump Roast 1. The roar of jet engines filled the air as Cheflock and Dim Sum boarded Rump Roast 1, the president's personal plane. Inside, the decor was as lavish and over the top as one might expect. Gold accents, plush seating, and framed portraits of Rump himself. Welcome aboard, the aide greeted them nervously. The president will brief you once we land. Dim Sum settled into a seat and glanced at the opulent surroundings. Gold accents, custom seats, framed portraits of himself. It's all exactly what you'd imagine. Cheflock sipped his tea, unbothered. Quite theatrical, but not entirely unexpected. Dim Sum smirked. Do you think the president genuinely needs our help, or is this another showpiece for his ego? Cheflock leaned back, his eyes sparkling with intrigue. Dim Sum, cases involving food and politics often unravel in the most fascinating ways. Let us keep an open mind. Still, it's curious they brought us in, Dim Sum mused. Shouldn't the White House chef be handling this? Perhaps, Cheflock replied, but it suggests a problem beyond their skill, which makes it delectable for us. Dim Sum chuckled lightly and adjusted his tie. So we're on our way to the White House. The aide, overhearing their conversation, turned with a faint smile. Not exactly. Act 4. The Culinary Conundrum. At the golf course, Rump wasted no time. Here's the deal, he said, gesturing to a covered dish that had been brought along. This, whatever it is, showed up on my table. I've been betrayed, folks. Betrayed. It's foreign, and I need you to find out who did it. Cheflock lifted the cover, revealing the dish. A perfectly prepared plate of arroz con gandules. The aroma of seasoned rice, pigeon peas, and pork wafted into the air. Dim Sum's eyes widened. This is a classic dish from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico? Rump's brow furrowed. That's part of America, right? So maybe it's fine. I've always loved Puerto Rico. Before Dim Sum could explain further, a voice interrupted. Hey everyone, it was Toffee Pinchloaf, an unpopular comedian who had been invited for a rally. Puerto Rico, isn't that the island of garbage? An awkward silence fell. Rump shot Pinchloaf a withering glare. Wrong. Very wrong. Terrible joke. I love Puerto Ricans. Act 5. The Truth Unveiled. Back at the White House, Cheflock worked tirelessly, his sharp mind piecing together the clues. The dish was made with care, he mused. The rice, the seasoning, all point to someone with a deep connection to Puerto Rican cuisine. Dim Sum nodded. But who among the staff? Cheflock suddenly straightened, his eyes alight with realization. The gardener. Observe the following. There were grains of dirt under his nails, a sure sign of recent work in the garden, unwashed for hours. His uniform tie was hastily fastened, suggesting he dressed in a rush. Furthermore, the faint aroma of plantains on his hands, an ingredient native to Puerto Rico cuisine, clinches it. And finally, he recently mentioned his grandmother's recipe, a detail that aligns perfectly. Let us pay him a visit. Moments later, they confronted the gardener, who confessed. Yes, it was me, he said. I only wanted to share a taste of home. I meant no harm. Rump's expression softened. You know what? It's a great dish. Tremendous, really. Let's keep it on the menu. But next time, let me know first. As the crisis resolved, Chef Luck and Denson prepared to leave. Another case closed, Chef Luck said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. Dimson chuckled, and a reminder that even the simplest dish can stir the greatest mysteries. Chef Luck grinned. Indeed, Dinsung. Now let's toast with tea. Chef Luck scones in The Vanishing Chef. Act 1. The missing ingredient. The harbor was alive with activity as the U.S. Navy ship USS Molasses prepared for its high-profile dinner hosting regional ambassadors. Chef Luck Scones and Dr. Dimsung arrived at the bustling pier, greeted by Commander Rosemary Gravy, the ship's stern yet approachable executive officer. The ship's 1MC pierced the air, announcing, "Ding, ding, ding, mess call." Dr. Dimsum jumped at the abrupt noise, fumbling his notebook. "What on earth was that, Chef Luck?" he exclaimed. Chef Luck smirked, adjusting his hat. "Dimsung, that's the ship's 1MC system. You'll find it hard to ignore in a vessel like this." "Mr. Scones," she began, "we're in dire straits. Our head chef, Master Chief Basil Mentz, has disappeared, leaving only this cryptic recipe behind." She handed over the grease-stained slip of paper. Chef Luck's eyes gleamed as he examined the note. "Fascinating," he murmured. "A blend of ingredients and riddles. This isn't just a recipe, it's a message." Dimsung squinted at the note. "Cumin, cardamom, and rosewater? Hardly standard Navy fare." Gravy nodded grimly. "If this dinner fails, it could jeopardize diplomatic relations. Can you find mince and solve this before the ambassadors arrive?" Chef Luck straightened his chef's hat. "Commander, you called the right man. Let us begin." Act 2. Clues in the galley. The ship's bells rang out. Ding, 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 ding. The 1MC followed promptly. Dinner preparations underway. Dr. Dimson glanced up. This ship's efficiency is almost unsettling. Chef Luck chuckled. "Discipline is their hallmark, Dimsung, though the galley will always be a symphony of controlled chaos." The ship's galley was a controlled frenzy. Sous chefs and culinary specialists worked overtime to prepare for the event. Chef Luck's eyes darted across the scene, taking in every detail. "The galley is an orchestra," he remarked. "When the conductor vanishes, dissonance follows. Dimson, take note of the staff dynamics." While Dimsum interviewed the crew, Chef Luck focused on the cryptic recipe. He pieced together a pattern. The ingredients listed correlated with the dishes from home countries of the ambassadors. Yet one ingredient stood out, a rare spice, grains of paradise. "This spice isn't standard issue," Chef Luck observed. "Its inclusion suggests someone with extensive culinary knowledge. Let's check the inventory." Act 3. A hidden agenda. Ding, 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 ding. The rhythm of the ship's bells resonated throughout the decks, a reminder of time steadily marching forward. Interesting, Shefflock mused. The ship is like a clockwork kitchen. Dim Sum nodded. Precise, though the chef is clearly missing. In the ship's storeroom, Shefflock discovered a nearly empty jar of grains of paradise. Nearby, a faint trail of spice dust led towards a maintenance hatch. Dim Sum frowned. Why would Mince be here? Following the trail, they entered a hidden alcove where they found a makeshift camp and a notebook filled with sketches of dishes and notes in multiple languages. Shefflock scanned the pages, his brow furrowing. These notes aren't just recipes, they're personal reflections, he said. Mince must be hiding something deeper. Act 4. Confronting the Truth. The sound of the approaching bells broke the quiet. Ding, 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 ding. The 1MC announced. Ambassador Olive Tarragon, arriving. Dr. Dinsung adjusted his spectacles. It's fascinating how even the arrivals are announced like dishes being served. Shefflock gave a small smile. Every piece of the ship is a performance, Dinsung. The trail led to the ship's observation deck, where they found Master Chief Mince gazing at the sea, clutching a small spice pouch. His face was wary, but resolute. Mince, Shefflock began, why abandon your post on the eve of such an important event? Mince sighed. I didn't abandon it. I was forced to reconsider it. One of the ambassadors is the reason I left my last post. They stole my signature recipe and claimed it as their own, ruining my career. Now they're here, and I couldn't face serving them again. Shefflock's eyes narrowed. And this cryptic recipe? A challenge? Mince nodded. If they can't decipher it, they don't deserve to taste it. Act 5. The Culinary Revelation. As the galley bustled, the 1MC chimed in. Ding, 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 ding. Final dinner preparations underway. Dr. Dim Sum observed the controlled chaos. A military ship's kitchen isn't so different from the operating theater, is it? Shefflock nodded as he inspected the ingredients. Precision and timing, Dim Sum. They are essentially everywhere. Shefflock and Dim Sum convinced Mince to return to the galley, where they prepared the symbolic dish together. Shefflock's keen palate and Mince's experience combined to elevate the recipe into something extraordinary. As the dish came together, Shefflock added a final touch. Grains of paradise infused in rosewater, a secret that could only be discovered through collaboration. Act 6. A Dinner to Remember. The ship's bells echoed ceremoniously. Ding, 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 ding. The deck came alive as ambassadors mingled and dishes were carried with practiced grace. Dim Sum, sipping a glass of water, smiled. I suppose even a military ship has moments of elegance. Shefflock watched the proceedings thoughtfully. Elegance, like good food, is a matter of careful preparation. At the dinner, the ambassadors were enchanted by the meal, each dish reflecting their culture and showcasing unity. One ambassador, visibly uncomfortable, avoided eye contact with Mince. Shefflock noted this and leaned over. Theft may tarnish a reputation, but redemption lies in acknowledgement, he whispered. The ambassador flushed and later approached Mince privately to apologize. As the evening concluded, Commander Gravy toasted Shefflock. To the man who not only saved our dinner, but reminded us of the power of integrity and collaboration. Shefflock smiled. Into the sea, Commander. A vast kitchen full of mysteries.
Chef Luck scones and chili tonka and the treacle tart factory. Act 1. The Golden Invitation. Mrs. Puddington bustled into the sitting room, waving an ornate golden ticket. The most peculiar thing has happened, Mr. Scones. I appear to have won an entry to Chili Tonka's treacle tart factory, but I have no interest in gallivanting about a confectionery. You and Dr. Dinsung should go in my stead. Chef Luck studied the ticket, intrigued. Chili Tonka, a legend in confectionery. His methods are shrouded in secrecy. His recipes revered. This might be worth our time, Dinsung. Before Dinsung could protest, a sharp knock echoed from the door. Detective Lestrudel stepped in, waving 2 more tickets. Scones, I stumbled upon these golden tickets. Well, one is mine, naturally, but my second I've been persuaded to surrender to no other than Iceland Batter. Iceland stepped forward, her usual composed expression tinged with amusement. We should all take this opportunity to uncover the mystery behind Tonka's success. That is, unless you're afraid I'll outmatch you, Chef Luck. A flicker of something unreadable passed over Chef Luck's face, but he smirked. Afraid? Hardly. I welcome the challenge. Act 2. The Enigmatic Factory. The treacle tart factory loomed ahead, its towering sugar glass gates reflecting the golden glow of the setting sun. As the 4 stepped inside, they were greeted by Chili Tonka himself, a man whose flamboyant attire and enigmatic smile carried an air of mischief. Welcome, my dear guest. You hold the golden key to my world. But be warned, this is no ordinary tour. It is a journey of discovery, one that will test more than just your taste buds. The other golden ticket winners, a mix of eager gourmands and skeptical critics, murmured among themselves. Then the doors swung open, revealing the wonderland of treacle rivers, sugar forest, and floating pastries. As they ventured deeper, they encountered strudel noodles, small, nimble workers dressed in pastry-like uniforms, busily kneading dough, stirring caramel, and flipping delicate pastries through the air. As they worked, they sang in unison. Strudel, noodle, doopity-doo. I've got a tasty lesson for you. Strudel, noodle, flip and fry. Mix it up and give it a try. If you want to bake with flair, you must learn to knead with care. Pastry, pasta, sweet and fun, making treats for everyone. Strudel, noodle, twist and roll. Fill the dough and bake it whole. Strudel, noodle, don't you frown. Golden brown will bring renown. The other golden ticket winners watched in awe as the strudel noodles moved with mechanical precision, their song filling the grand confectionery hall. Fascinating, Chef Lot murmured, studying their technique. Efficient, rhythmic, and undeniably skilled. There's a method to this madness. Act 3. The Vanishing Contestants. As the tour progressed, one by one, ticket holders mysteriously disappeared. A woman sampling the treacle fountain was suddenly nowhere to be found. A man examining the caramel lattice walkway left only his footprints behind. Curious, Chef Lot murmured, running a gloved finger over the edge of an abandoned tasting spoon. This isn't a simple confectionery escapade. Something deliberate is at play. Iceline, walking beside him, smirked. Figure that out already? I'd expect nothing less. Their eyes met, an unspoken challenge between rivals who understood each other better than most. Meanwhile, Lestrudel fumbled with his notebook, attempting to document the disappearances while simultaneously stuffing his pockets with marshmallow truffles. Dimson sighed. Lestrudel, if you'd stop eating the evidence, you might be of some use. Act 4. The final test. Only Cheflock, Dimsung, Lestrudel, and Iceline remained. The factory had led them through chambers of confectionery delights and elaborate culinary puzzles, yet each room had claimed another guest. Chili Tonka clapped his hands. Ah, my finest guest, you have demonstrated intellect, perception, and an appreciation for the art of sweets, but only one of you may inherit my factory. The room fell silent. Then all eyes turned to Cheflock Scones. You have the sharpest palate, the keenest mind. You are my chosen heir, Tonka declared. But Cheflock, overcomposed, shook his head. I belong to the mysteries of the world, not to the walls of a factory, no matter how grand. My place is elsewhere. Tonka nodded, unfazed. Then the honor falls to the next most qualified candidate, Iceland Batter. Would you accept this mantle? A rare flicker of uncertainty crossed Iceland's face. She glanced at Cheflock as if expecting him to say something. When he remained silent, she lifted her chin. I accept. Act 5. Parting Ways. With her new role, Iceland was to remain at the factory, learning from Tonka's organization. The factory gates loomed behind them, and for the first time in their rivalry, neither she nor Cheflock had a parting quip ready. Dimsung, ever the observer, glanced between them. For a woman who delights in besting you, she seems rather reluctant to go. Cheflock adjusted his cuffs. She will be a formidable confectioner. The world will remember her name. As the gates closed behind Iceland, she turned once, just for a moment, before disappearing into the golden glow of the factory. And with that, Cheflock Scones walked away, his mind already moving to the next great mystery. Cheflock Scones in The Pie Bite Zone. Act 1. Imagine, if you will. Imagine, if you will, a world just like our own, yet entirely inverted. A place where the familiar becomes strange, where the rules of reality shift like the layers of a well-crafted pastry. Within the grand halls of this estate, time stirs in circles, and the very nature of fate has been turned on its head. The reason? A dish, a single forbidden recipe, baked with precision and care, yet with unintended consequences. The man arriving now has no idea that he's about to step into a world where up is down, sweet is sour, and the very fabric of logic has been kneaded into a paradox. But for a mind as sharp as his, the ingredients of this mystery will soon be laid bare. He is Cheflock Scones, and this is The Pie Bite Zone. Act 2. The Letter of Desperation. It was an unusually quiet morning on Baker's Row when Cheflock Scones unfolded a letter with meticulous care. A cup of tea, left untouched, steamed beside him, its aroma mixing with the scent of parchment and ink. Dr. Dinsung, seated across from him, tapped his fingers against the wooden table. You're quiet, Cheflock. Either that letter contains a puzzle worthy of your mind, or someone has finally invited you to a supper you cannot refuse. Cheflock excelled sharply. Marga dessert. The most powerful purveyor of stocks, chicken, beef, vegetable. A woman who dictates the very foundation of broths and reductions across the globe. And yet, this letter is not from her. Dimsung leaned forward. A mystery indeed. Who wrote it? a personal assistant of hers, absent when the event began. It seems Marga's estate has changed. No further details, only urgency, and 2 first-class plane tickets. Sheflock folded the letter and placed it beside his untouched tea. Dim Sung, when one of the most influential culinary figures in the world is suddenly in distress and refuses to speak for herself, I cannot ignore it. Act 3. A World Upside Down. The carriage ride to Marga Desert's estate had been uneventful, but the moment they stepped onto the grounds, Sheflock knew something was amiss. The air held a heaviness, as though reality itself had thickened. The once pristine gardens were tangled and overgrown, yet somehow pruned into unsettling symmetrical shapes. At the grand entrance, they were greeted not by butlers or house staff, but by uniformed guards shouting orders. Beyond them, a spectacle unfolded. What should have been a grand estate kitchen now bore the resemblance of a chaotic prison. Workers toiled under flickering gaslight, kneading dough in iron bowls, their movements dictated by shrill whistles. A commanding laugh broke through the commotion. "Welcome, dear guest. You've arrived just in time for roll call. But I warn you, in my domain, you either follow the rules or you bake in the dungeon." Marga Desert, clad in warden's garb, surveyed the scene with an air of chaotic authority. Dim Sung turned to Sheflock, voice low. "What in heaven's name happened here?" Sheflock adjusted his cuffs. "The world has been flipped like an overturned souffle, and I intend to find out why." Act 4. The Forbidden Recipe. "The ritual of reversal," he read aloud. "A dish once prepared in times of desperation, meant to undo fate, change outcomes, and rewrite reality. It was never meant to be eaten, yet someone baked it anyway." Dim Sum leaned in, and the result? A world inside out. To undo it, we must prepare the counter recipe. But first, we must determine the missing ingredient. At that moment, a sudden clatter erupted from the far end of the kitchen as Marga's guards rushed toward them. The warden had caught wind of their investigation, and she would not allow them to interfere. Act 5. Restoring Order. The kitchen had never been a battlefield, but tonight it became one. Sheflock, Dim Sung, and the assistant worked with measured urgency, dodging the advancing guards, while carefully reconstructing the forbidden dish in reverse. Every ingredient measured, every movement precise. At last, the final component, a rare golden spice that had been locked away in Marga's private collection, was folded into the mix. The moment it touched the batter, a low hum vibrated through the room, the very air shimmering as reality began to shift. Marga Desert blinked, as if walking from a fever dream. What happened? And why do I smell nutmeg?" Dim Sung exhaled in relief. "Welcome back, Miss Desert. You were quite the warden." Sheflock took a final sip of his long-forgotten tea, now cold. Another case solved. The world, as it should be, restored. And yet, I must admit, I'll miss the excitement of the pie bite zone. The wind howled through the now empty halls of the estate as the great iron gates creaked open once more. The world, once twisted, had returned to its natural state. But for those who had glimpsed the inversion, one question remained. What if the recipe had never been undone?
Sheflock scones in The Poisoned Palate. Act 1. A Fateful Bite. The evening was a spectacle of culinary grandeur. The grand gastronomy showcase, held in the opulent Ganache de la Creme ballroom, was a gathering of the world's finest chefs and gastronomes. Among them stood Saffron Roux, a culinary virtuoso whose sauces were said to sing on the tongue. Chef Scones and Dr. Dinsung observed from the side of the room, sampling a selection of amuse-bouches while engaging in quiet discussion. Saffron Rouge's latest creation is said to redefine the balance of savory and sweet, Dim Sum murmured, sipping a delicate consommé. I am curious to see if such claims hold weight. Saffron stepped forward to present his signature dish, an elegantly plated truffle-infused souffle. He raised a bite to his lips, savoring the moment, then froze. His expression twisted in sheer horror. He choked, clutching the table. I can't taste anything. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The once celebrated chef now stood trembling, his hand quivering over his tongue as though willing it to function. Murmurs of concern turned to panic, and the showcase descended into chaos. Chef Luck's gaze sharpened. He strode forward, intercepting the fallen fork before it hit the tablecloth. He held it to his nose, inhaling with a critical eye. No immediate toxins. The souffle's aroma is intact. Dim Sum bent over Saffron, checking his vitals. His pulse is steady, but his panic is real. Whatever has afflicted him is neither a simple allergy, nor a known poison. Chef Luck straightened, his eyes scanning the retreating figures of event organizers as they hastily covered the scene. Someone doesn't want this getting out. Act 2. The pattern emerges. By morning, news of the incident had vanished. Not a single publication mentioned Saffron Rouge's collapse. Instead, a small blurb buried in the back pages of the Culinary Digest stated that he had decided to take a sudden, indefinite leave from cooking. Chef Luck and Dim Sum sat in their office at Baker's Row, poring over disappearances of renowned chefs over the past year. Too many to be coincidence, Dim Sum noted. Each one left the industry abruptly, no cause given. Not left, Chef Luck corrected. They were taken. A knock on the door interrupted their musings. A figure, clad in a hood, slipped inside. Clove Brûlé, a former pastry chef now living in fear, removed his hood. I don't have long. They know I'm talking to you. Chef Luck motioned for him to sit. Tell me everything. Clove's fingers trembled around a crumpled napkin. It's Mitchell and Artie. They're perfecting a poison that can erase taste itself. No antidote, no cure, just an empty mouth. Forever. Dim Sum's face paled. A toxin that removes taste? That's monstrous. Clove nodded. They're testing on chefs, refining the formula before they sell it to governments, corporations, anyone who wants control. Control? Dim Sum asked. Imagine being able to dictate how people perceive food. What if only one company could make anything taste good? What if an entire nation's food supply became dull and inedible overnight? Clove's voice dropped lower. They don't just want to erase taste, they want to own it. Before another word could be spoken, Clove gasped. His hands clutched at his throat. His eyes widening, he collapsed, his last breath escaping with a whisper. It's already too late. A thin metallic scent lingered in the air. Chef Luck and Dim Sum exchanged a glance. Mitchell and Artie had struck again. Act 3. Into the lion's den. There was only one way forward, to infiltrate Mitchell and Artie's network. Chef Luck's investigation led him to an invitation-only event, the Banquet of Taste, an underground dining experience for the world's culinary elite. The most exclusive event in the industry, Dim Sum remarked as he adjusted his cuffs, and the most dangerous. Using forged credentials, they entered a candlelit hall adorned with decadent table settings. At the head of the room sat figures Chef Luck had long suspected, Mitchell and Artie's inner circle. Servers moved between tables,
carrying silver trays laden with exotic dishes. Chef Locke whispered, "We must locate the source of the poison." Dimson nodded, but his attention was drawn to the central table, where a dish covered in a golden cloche was being unveiled. The diners who had paid the highest fees leaned forward in anticipation. A masked figure at the head of the table spoke. "Tonight, you taste the future." The cloche was lifted, revealing a glistening, perfectly marbled cut of meat, its juices shimmering under the chandeliers. The masked figure gestured grandly. "For those who dine with Mitchell and Nardi, taste is a privilege." Chef Luck's eyes narrowed. He recognized the same metallic scent that had lingered after Clove Brulee's death. A realization dawned. The poison was in the food, but only served to select individuals. Act 4. The trap closes. Chef Luck discreetly retrieved a sample, intending to analyze it later. But before he could slip away, a firm hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Scones?" The masked figure loomed over him. "Surely you wouldn't want to leave without a taste." A plate was set before him, the poisoned dish. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Dim Sung's voice was tight. "Chef Luck." Chef Luck exhaled calmly, lifting his fork. It would be rude to refuse. He took a bite. For a moment, nothing. The flavors burst forth, a dance of richness and spice. Then, slowly, a creeping emptiness spread across his tongue. His eyes met Dinsung's. "I can't taste anything." Act 5. Taking hold. The world blurred as the poison took hold. Dim Sung caught Chef Luck before he could collapse fully, his grip firm and desperate. The masked figure laughed softly. "It's a shame. Even the great Chef Luck Scones is not immune to progress." The last thing Chef Luck heard before the darkness swallowed him was Dim Sung's voice, tight with urgency. "We have to get him out of here." To be continued.
Chef Lock Scones and Rebuilding Taste. Act 1. A World Without Flavor. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of Baker's Row, casting long shadows across the countertop. Chef Lock Scones sat motionless, staring at the steaming cup of tea before him. Dr. Dim Sung leaned forward, concern etched across his face. "Try again," Dim Sung urged, placing a spoon in Chef Lock's hand. Chef Lock lifted the tea to his lips, let the liquid roll across his tongue, and waited. Nothing. No bitterness, no warmth, no hint of the delicate infusion he knew should be there. His expression remained unreadable, but Dim Sung saw the tension in his shoulders. Dim Sung sighed. "It's been 3 days. If the poison were permanent." "I'm not interested in assumptions." Chef Lock's voice was measured but cold. He placed the cup down with deliberate care. "The fact remains, I cannot taste." A knock at the door broke the silence. Detective Lestrudel entered carrying a thick folder of notes. "I've compiled everything I could find," he announced, setting it on the table. "No known toxin works like this. It's as if it's rewriting how taste functions entirely." Chef Lock flipped through the pages, his sharp eyes scanning the reports. "Then we aren't dealing with a poison. We're dealing with a design." Act 2. Rebuilding Taste from Memory. The kitchen table was soon covered in an array of ingredients. Dim Sung had gathered a variety of dishes, savory, sweet, bitter, spicy, each carefully prepared and plated before Chef Lock. "If I can no longer trust my tongue," Chef Lock murmured, "then I must trust my mind." He reached for a dish of roasted lamb with rosemary, running his fingers over the surface. This should be tender, subtly infused with earthiness, carrying a finish of. He trailed off, frowning. The words were there, but the certainty was not.
Dim Sum watched as Chef Lot mentally reconstructed the dish. He closed his eyes, recalling past flavors, trying to map each sensation in his memory. But when he spoke, it was wrong. The rosemary's too sharp, Chef Lot declared. It overpowers the lamb. Dim Sum hesitated. There is no rosemary in this dish. Chef Locke's grip tightened on the fork. He exhaled, steadying himself. Again. Dish after dish, he repeated the process. Failures piled up. The perfect mind of Chef Locke's scones faltered against the missing foundation of flavor. Each mistake was a reminder. He was incomplete. And then, a breakthrough. On the next attempt, he lifted a spoonful of vanilla custard and, without tasting, described its flavor with flawless accuracy. Dim Sum's breath hitched. You got it right. Chef Locke's eyes flickered with something unreadable. I still have my mind. Act 3. The missing ingredient. The strudel, who had been pacing in thought, suddenly snapped his fingers. The antidote, he blurted. What if it already exists? Dim Sum and Chef Locke turned to him. The strudel continued. Michelinardi doesn't test a poison like this without controlling the antidote. What if someone at the banquet had a counteragent without knowing it? Chef Locke's brow furrowed in concentration. The banquet, the seating arrangement, the order of service. His mind worked through the details at dizzying speed. And then it came to him. The second course, he murmured. A dish reserved for select diners, distinct from the rest. I suspected its rarity, but not its purpose. He looked up sharply. Find that dish. Act 4. The antidote is found, but it's imperfect. Dim Sum and Lestrudel worked tirelessly, tracking down records and speaking to banquet staff. After painstaking research, they identified the dish, a saffron-infused consommé. Recreating the exact recipe, Dim Sum placed a small bowl before Chef Locke. This is it. If you're right, this should reverse the effects. Chef Locke lifted the spoon to his lips. The liquid passed over his tongue, and for the first time in days, flavor. A rush of sensation flooded his senses. He could taste the warmth, the depth of saffron, the delicate notes of garlic and onion. The relief in the room was palpable. But then it faded. His breath caught. The taste was gone again. Dim Sum's expression darkened. The cure isn't holding. Chef Locke closed his eyes, letting the realization settle. The poison's effect fluctuates. My sense of taste isn't fully restored. It will come and go, without warning. Act 5. Setting up the finale. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. Chef Locke turned toward the spice rack, running his fingers along the labeled jars. He stopped at a familiar bottle of star anise. He opened it, inhaled. Nothing. He exhaled, replacing the lid. Dim Sum spoke hesitantly. Chef Locke, what do we do now? A shadow crossed Chef Locke's face, but when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet resolve. We end this. The scene shifts. Michelinardi's headquarters. A masked figure receives a report. Scones is still alive. A slow smile spreads beneath the mask. Then let us accelerate our plans. Back in Baker's Row, Chef Locke turned to Dim Sum. It's time we put an end to Michelinardi. To be continued. Chef Locke scones in The Final Course. Act 1. The Final Poisoning. Baker's Row had never felt so quiet. Chef Locke scones sat in his kitchen table, unmoving, staring at an untouched plate before him. Dr. Dim Sum stood nearby, concern creasing his brow. You're planning something, Dim Sum said, watching him closely. Chef Locke didn't look up. Instead, he traced his fingers across the rim of his teacup. I'm merely considering my options. Dim Sum folded his arms. Don't insult me, Chef Locke. I know you. When you start making peace with your surroundings, you're preparing for an exit. Before Chef Locke could respond,
A knock sounded at the door. Detective Lestrudel entered, holding a crisp white envelope. "It arrived an hour ago," Lestrudel said, handing it over. Shefflock unfolded the letter, expecting a simple message. Instead, 3 black and white photographs slipped from its folds, fluttering toward the table. He caught them before they landed, his eyes narrowing. Each image depicted an ordinary street scene, yet something about them felt deliberate. The second photo showed Mrs. Puddington exiting her bakery, while the third captured Lestrudel crossing a quiet road. The first, however, sent a chill through him. It was Dim Sum, seated at a cafe, a shadowed figure in the reflection of the window behind him. Shefflock's grip tightened on the edges, a silent warning, a declaration. Mitchell and Ardia was watching them all. Without a word, he slid the photos back into the envelope, concealing them before either Lestrudel or Dim Sum could notice. Only then did he pull out the letter, scanning the address before settling on the final 3 words. "This ends tonight." Act 2. The Secret Errand. Shefflock stepped onto the damp London streets, the envelope still in his pocket. Dim Sum and Lestrudel followed closely behind, their expressions tense. "You're awfully quiet," Dim Sum noted. "I have an errand to run," Shefflock said, his tone neutral. "I'll meet you at the address." Dim Sum frowned. "An errand? Shefflock, now isn't the time." But Shefflock was already turning away, vanishing into the winding streets. 20 minutes later, he arrived at a modest, dimly lit laboratory tucked between a butcher shop and a tea house. He rapped his knuckles against the heavy metal door, and after a pause, a mechanical lock clicked open. Mozzie Pepper stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her lab coat slightly stained with what smelt like burnt sugar. "Shefflock," she said, surprised. "I thought you'd forgotten." "I never forget," he replied, stepping inside. The lab was cluttered with beakers, preserved herbs, and a series of vials glowing faintly under the low light. A large bubbling distillation rig hissed softly in the corner. Mozzie moved quickly, retrieving a small vial from a locked case. "This is experimental," she said, holding it up. "I still don't know if it will work." Shefflock examined the liquid inside, watching as it shifted colors under the lamplight. He said nothing. Mozzie hesitated, lowering her voice. "You know you don't have to do this alone." Shefflock finally met her gaze. His expression was unreadable. "I'll let you know if I survive." Before she could respond, he slipped the vial into his coat and turned for the door. Meanwhile, Dim Sum and Lestrudel arrived at the address first. The building was eerily quiet. They exchanged a glance before stepping inside. The moment the doors shut behind them, a click echoed through the room. The trap had been sprung. Act 3. The Final Banquet. The address led to a private dining hall, tucked away in the wealthiest district of London. Mitchell and Nardi's most elite patrons filled the candlelit room, murmuring over their elaborate meals. Shefflock stepped inside, his coat trailing behind him. At the head of the table, a masked figure arose to greet him. "For all your meddling, Mr. Scones, we have prepared a fitting farewell." Servants entered a carrying dish under a silver cloche. The moment the lid was lifted, Shefflock knew. This was the final poison. He turned to the masked figure. "And if I refuse?" The response was immediate. "Then your friends suffer." Shefflock glanced at the far end of the room, where a set of velvet curtains was drawn. The faintest movement behind them suggested unseen captives. Dim Sum? Miss Puddington? Lestrudel? He couldn't be sure. A choice was never truly given. Shefflock exhaled and picked up his fork. He took a bite. Act 4. The Illusion of Defeat. The moment the food touched his tongue, Shefflock felt his senses collapse inward. The last remnants of taste flickered and died, leaving only silence where flavor once lived. A ringing filled his ears. His limbs grew heavy. He fell forward, catching himself on the table's edge. The room erupted in applause. The masked figure leaned down. Even the great Cheflock Scones cannot escape his fate. As his vision blurred, a single thought cut through the haze. Mozzie's vial, the gamble he had taken, would it be enough? Then, darkness swallowed him. When he awoke, he was somewhere new. A dimly lit chamber. The scent of aged paper and leather-bound books surrounded him. Dim Sum stood over him, his face a mask of quiet devastation. "It's all over," he whispered. They took everything." Cheflock blinked, adjusting to the weight in his limbs. His throat was dry. He could still breathe, still move, but his taste? He tried to recall a sensation of the dish he had eaten, but it was gone, utterly and completely. Dim Sum hesitated before speaking. His voice was hollow. "You've lost everything, Cheflock." Cheflock closed his eyes for a long moment, then exhaled. "Then it's done." Act 5. The Hidden Plan. Days passed, then weeks. London adjusted to the loss of Cheflock Scones, the world-renowned culinary detective. Articles were written about his tragic downfall. Michelin already tightened his grip on the food industry. The game had changed. But Cheflock had not disappeared. From the shadows, he worked, unraveling Michelin-Arty's network, dismantling his empire piece by piece. He could no longer act in light, but that no longer mattered. Taste was gone, but the mind remained. Then, one night, he returned to Baker's Row. Dim Sum found him standing in the dark kitchen, hands resting lightly on the countertop. A farewell was coming. "You shouldn't be here," Dim Sum said quietly. "I had to see it one last time." Dim Sum swallowed hard. "When will I see you again?" Cheflock's eyes softened. "Don't look for me." And then, just like that, he was gone. Act 6. A world without Cheflock. Months passed. The world continued. Dim Sum did his best to move on. Mrs. Puddington continued managing Baker's Row. Lestrudel chased his own cases, still looking for the answers Cheflock would have found in minutes. But something was happening. Michelin-Arty's network was unraveling. The organization was losing its grip. Factories closed without explanation. Black market suppliers vanished. Investigations turned up nothing but echoes. And then, one day, a small package arrived at Baker's Row. No return address, no markings. Dim Sum opened it. Inside was a single silver spoon engraved with a barely visible letter, S. A slow smile crossed Dim Sum's face. "You never could sit still, could you?"